Hello, hello. Thank you for joining me. I read a book a week and externalize my studies by sharing vocal readings from those books. This is the 19th week that I've been doing this, and I'm reading currently from Rick Hanson's Buddha's Brain. This is the final day that I'll be sharing passages from Buddha's Brain. I must say that Rick Hanson's description of the neurological evolution of the illusion of self, how it's benefited humanity to have this illusion through our evolution, and how we can now benefit from identifying it as an illusion, really has added texture to my understanding. Another focus point that will be emphasized in our vocal readings today, I want to point out before we get started, is that paradoxically, when we care for ourselves, we are fostering our humility. And this is because when we feel fully cared for, the neural pathways that would make the illusion of self prominent in our systems are calmed down. Without further ado, I'll get started. We're on page 195 and discussing the meditation process, specifically how to filter out distractions. This is something that I've latently experienced, but I've never read this, so I really want to emphasize it. Paradoxically, inviting distractions in encourages them to move out. Dropping the second dart of resistance to them reduces the amount of attention they get. Additionally, the brain tends to become habituated to a steady stimulus and stops noticing it after a while. 198. The more enjoyable and intense your feelings are, the greater the dopamine release and the more concentrated your attention. In other words, whether you're going deep into meditative contemplation or just trying to keep your eyes open in an afternoon meeting, happiness can really help. Page 208. Thoughts, feelings, images, and so on exist as patterns of information represented by patterns of neural structure and activity. In the same way, the various aspects of the apparent self and the intimate and powerful experience of being a self exist as patterns in the mind and brain. The question is not whether these patterns exist. The questions are, what is their nature? And does that which those patterns seem to stand for, an I, who is the unified, ongoing owner of experiences and agent of actions, truly exist? Page 209. If the prefrontal cortex, which provides most of the neural substrate of the autobiographical self, were to be damaged, the core self would remain, though with little sense of continuity with the past or future. On the other hand, if the subcortical and brainstem structures, which the core self relies upon, were damaged, then both the core and autobiographical selves would disappear, which suggests that the core self is the neural and mental foundation of the autobiographical self. When your mind is very quiet, the autobiographical self seems largely absent, which presumably corresponds to a relative deactivation of its neural substrate. There's no subject inherent in subjectivity. In advanced meditation practices, one finds a bare awareness without a subject. Awareness requires subjectivity, but it does not require a subject. From a neurological standpoint, the everyday feeling of being a unified self is an utter illusion. The apparently coherent and solid I is actually built from many subsystems and sub-subsystems over the course of development with no fixed center. And the fundamental sense that there is a subject of experience is fabricated from myriad disparate moments of subjectivity. Page 212. Subjectivity is just a way to structure experience. It's not an entity, a ghostly being looking out through your eyes. In fact, observing your own experience shows that the self, the apparent subject, often comes in after the fact. In many ways, the self is like someone running behind a parade that is already well underway, continually calling out, "See what I created?" As different parts of self come forward and then give way to other parts, so do the momentary neural assemblies that enable them. If the energy flows of these assemblies could be seen as a play of light, an extraordinary show would move endlessly about your head. In the brain, every manifestation of self is impermanent. The self is continually constructed, deconstructed, and constructed again. 113. When the feeling tone is neutral, the self tends to fade into the background. But as soon as something distinctly pleasant or unpleasant appears, for example, an interesting email or physical pain, the self quickly mobilizes along the processing cascade that moves from feeling tone to craving, and from craving to clinging. The self organizes around strong desires. Which comes first? Do I form a desire, or does desire form an I? Page 215. The evolution of relationships fostered the evolution of self and vice versa. The benefits of self have thus been a factor in the evolution of the brain. Self has been stitched into human DNA by reproductive advantages slowly accumulating across 100,000 generations. The point here isn't to defend or justify the self, but neither should we demean or suppress it. Just don't make self special. It's simply an arising mental pattern that's not categorically different from or better than any other mind object. Page 217. Paradoxically, it supports humility to take good care of yourself, since self networks in your brain activate when you feel threatened or unsupported. To reduce this activation, make sure your fundamental needs are well cared for. Page 219. Consider renouncing specialness, including being important and admired. Renunciation is the antithesis of clinging and thus a radical path to happiness. Say phrases like these in your mind and notice what they feel like. I give up being important. I renounce seeking approval. Feel the peace in this surrender. To live, to have a metabolism, your body must be joined with the world through continuing exchanges of energy and matter. Similarly, your brain isn't fundamentally separate from the rest of the body that feeds and protects it. Therefore, in a deep sense, your brain is joined with the world. This may be my favorite passage in this book. The whole remains reliably whole. The whole never clings and suffers. Ignorance contracts from the totality into the self. Wisdom reverses that process, emptying the self out into allness. It's a wonderful paradox that as individuals, such as the self, feel increasingly groundless and unreliable, the totality of everything feels increasingly safe and comforting. As the sense of groundlessness grows, each apparently individual thing seems a bit like a cloud that you'll fall through if you try to stand on it. At first, this is pretty unnerving, but then you realize that the sky itself, the totality, is holding you up. You are walking on the sky because you're sky. It has always been that way. You and everyone else have been sky all along. And I think that that was a wonderful passage to conclude with. Thank you for joining me in my studies today.